Sir, step aside. I said step aside now. The words cut sharper than the airport's cold metal detectors. All around him, passengers rolled their carry-ons past the security checkpoint, indifferent. Some paused, some whispered, but no one intervened. The man in the charcoal jacket, calm, composed, clearly educated, stood frozen. Not because he didn't hear, but because he'd heard it too many times before. The TSA agent, white, square-jawed, uniform stiff with starch, didn't bother lowering his voice. You match the description of someone we're monitoring. He didn't even glance at the passport yet, just the skin. The tension swelled like a tide. One family clutched their children closer. A woman pulled out her phone and not to call for help, but to record. The situation was already turning into a spectacle. Have you ever been in a place where people stared not at who you are, but what they assumed you must be? That feeling, slow boil of humiliation under your skin, the itch to scream, but the cost of doing so too high. He could have argued, he could have raised his voice, but instead, he asked one simple question. Would you like to check my bag? The agent narrowed his eyes. If you have nothing to hide, open it. And just like that, every head in line turned. Every camera lens twitched toward him. His hands moved slowly to slowly, perhaps not out of guilt, but because the moment you're treated like a criminal, even innocence becomes a performance. The bag of well-worn leather carry-on clicked open, but he didn't unzip it yet. He looked up, held eye contact, and asked calmly, would you like me to open it now, or should I wait until your supervisor arrives? Silence. And then, supervisor's already watching. The agent smirked, glancing toward a tinted window above the line. Behind the glass was that a man in a suit. Was he nodding? What was going on? That's when someone muttered, looks like another smuggler trying to play innocent. Another. He heard that word before, too many times. Smuggler, hustler, gang member, thug. Every label except the one that mattered. Every label except CEO. But that wasn't even the worst part. Because when he finally opened that case, no one, not even the man behind the glass, was ready for what was inside. Let me ask you this. If the world mistook you for a criminal just because of how you look, would you open the case? Or walk away? Tell me, seriously, what would you do? Drop your answer below. I'm curious. Because what happened next flipped the entire airport upside down. The zipper finally moved. Slow, deliberate. The soft hiss echoed through the terminal as the man's hand peeled open the worn leather flap. People leaned in, eyes narrowing, phones raised higher. The TSA agent shifted his stance, hands just inches from his belt ready. What came next wasn't weapons, cash, or suspicious wires. It was paper. Dozens of them. Carefully arranged folders, color-coded tabs, stamped logos of global banks, UN letterheads, investment portfolios thick with signatures. At the very top, a glossy printout, a photo of him, shaking hands with the Secretary General of the United Nations. Silence, then whispers, then phones clicking faster than before zooming in. The agent frowned, snatched one of the documents. His eyes darted across the lines. Something about African infrastructure redevelopment backed by U.S. funding. What is this? He muttered. The man looked him square in the eye. This, he said, is my life's work. A pause. Then he added, calmly, and you almost threw it on the floor because I didn't look like the man in your mind. For a split second, the agent flinched. He wasn't prepared for that sentence. Behind him, the supervisor from the glass booth had appeared, mid-40s, graying temples, stiff in posture but now visibly nervous. He cleared his throat. Mr. Diallo. The CEO turned slowly. Mr. Babacar Diallo, the man confirmed, CEO of Gideon Group. Gasps. Someone whispered, wait, the Gideon Group, the one funding hospitals in Sierra Leone. Another added, I saw him speak at Davos last year. And just like that, the atmosphere turned. People who had judged a stranger were now watching a billionaire in real time, silently wishing they could disappear. The TSA agent stiffened. I didn't mean to. You didn't need to. Diallo cut in, voice cool as steel. You already decided who I was the moment I walked in. Let me ask you something real for a second. Have you ever been reduced to a stereotype, even after everything you've achieved? Maybe it wasn't this public. Maybe no one live streamed it. But deep down did it sting just as much? If yes, drop just one word below. Truth. Because that's what it felt like in that terminal. But what came next? That's where it gets terrifying. Because someone in that airport wasn't ready to let him go that easily. And the way they tried to cover their tracks, it made national headlines. Just as the tension began to melt, another voice cut through the silence. Mr. Diallo, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us. It wasn't a request. It was a command, flat and mechanical. Two new figures had apparate plainclothes, badges flashed quickly to read. Suits slightly wrinkled like they had rushed from a back room. Diallo didn't flinch. He calmly zipped his case closed, clicked the lock into place, and stood. On what grounds? He asked. One of the men, younger, square-cut beard, replied without blinking. National Security Review. Standard protocol. Interesting, Diallo murmured, because just 30 seconds ago, I was being accused of smuggling. The older agent tried to smile. We're just doing our job, sir. The crowd around them began to shift again, phones now recording with new urgency. A whisper. They're trying to walk him out quietly. Another voice. Are they covering something up? And then came the push. Not physical worse. Verbal. A woman in uniform, clearly nervous, stepped forward with a clipboard. We found traces of an unregistered signal in your bag, she said, eyes avoiding his. The lie was clumsy, almost desperate, but to the untrained ear, it could sound real. Diallo looked at her, then at the two plainclothes men, and finally up toward the tinted glass booth again. The supervisor was gone. Have you ever seen a lie being built right in front of you? And worse, watch people nod along because they wanted to believe it? That's what was happening now. The same crowd that gasped minutes ago, now confused, divided, some doubting, some scared to speak. That's how systems work, isn't it? Confuse the public, flood the space with half-truths, smear the victim with just enough uncertainty so the shame sticks. Diallo knew the game, and he wasn't playing it. He lifted his phone's sleek, black, nearly invisible in his palm and tapped the screen twice. A soft chime. Then, all right, he said quietly. I've started live streaming too. The plainclothes men froze. So did the woman with the clipboard. Every angle had shifted. Power had just flipped. And now, the world was watching him not as a suspect, not as a stereotype, but as a man calmly documenting the truth. Let me ask you something. If you were surrounded by lies in public, by people in uniform, would you trust silence? Or would you fight with the only weapon left, your voice? Drop your answer below. Just one word, either silence or voice. Because what Babacar Diallo said next into his live stream made the entire airport system tremble. Before I tell you what he said to the world that made the entire airport hold its breath, I know you might be busy. Maybe you're watching this during your break. Maybe your boss is calling. Maybe you've got errands to run. But if stories like this pull something inside you, if you've ever been judged, without a word spoken, then hit that subscribe button, because you're going to want to see what happened after this. Now back to the moment. Babacar Diallo turned his camera toward himself. No filters, no angles, just truth. This is Babacar Diallo, he began, voice low but steady, CEO of the Gideon Group. I'm at the International Terminal, Gate D13, where I've just been detained without cause. He didn't shout. He didn't flinch. And yet the feed exploded. Viewers were already pouring in, not because of who he was, but because of how he was doing it. Unshaken, controlled, public. Behind him, the agents were whispering into their earpieces. The woman with the clipboard had vanished. But Diallo wasn't done. He turned the camera slowly, capturing the faces around him frozen, wide-eyed, some ashamed, some just confused. He narrated every detail. How his bag was flagged, how he was stopped with no explanation, how official documents were ignored until he mentioned his title. Then he said something that stopped everything. I want the world to understand what suspicion looks like when it's an urn. It looks like me, standing here on my way to speak about renewable power being accused of smuggling in my own country. Gasps. In real time, the numbers on his stream ticked higher. 12K, 17K, 24K viewers. A woman near the back covered her mouth, and then, from the edge of the security line, someone stepped forward. A teenage girl. No badge, no suit, just a hoodie and a backpack, eyes filled with fire. She spoke, loud enough for everyone to hear. This isn't okay. The silence after her words was louder than any alarm. And for the first time since the zipper opened, someone else stood beside Diallo. That was the first crack, the moment the tide began to turn. But who that girl was, and how she changed everything, that's a story you need to hear next. At first, no one moved. The girl's voice, sharp, clean, unshaken, hung in the air like a flag no one had expected to see raised. She didn't look like someone important, just a teenager, backpack slung low, hair in a messy bun. Black hoodie that read science is not a crime. But Babacar Diallo turned, and for the first time, he smiled. What's your name? He asked gently. Zora, she replied. Zora Kendrick. Thank you, Zora. The plainclothes agents didn't know what to do. Neither did the TSA, because when a child speaks truth, adults freeze. Zora turned toward the crowd. Her voice rose, not with volume, but with clarity. You all saw it. They flagged him, then changed the reason. Now they're trying to remove him without ever admitting they were wrong. Silence. A middle-aged man stepped back into the shadows. A young woman lowered her Phoenician she had filmed, but said nothing. A little boy tugged his mom's sleeve. Is he in trouble? No, she whispered. He shouldn't be. Have you ever witnessed something wrong and stayed silent? And then someone younger than you had the courage to speak. That shame, the quiet, bitter knot in your stomach, that's how half the terminal was feeling now. But Zora, she wasn't finished. I've seen this before, she said. My dad works in clean energy. He says the hardest part of changing the world isn't the tech, it's the gatekeepers. Diallo's eyes widened slightly. He knew the line. It was his own. A quote from a speech he gave 3 years ago in Cape Town. Zora Kendrick had watched him before. She wasn't random. She wasn't a bystander. She was the first person who recognized him before the name drop. And no, she wasn't alone. A man in a gray suit slowly stepped forward. I'm with the IRE, he said. International Renewable Energy. I've seen your name on funding rounds. He pulled out his phone. This isn't right. And just like that, the crowd began to fracture. Whispers turned into sentences. Sentences into declarations. I've seen his company build in Ghana. He's on the World Bank panel. That's Babacar Diallo built the Lagos solar grid. The plainclothes men exchanged looks. It was slipping from them. Control, narrative, perception. That's when the younger agent made a mistake. He stepped forward too quickly, hand brushing his holster, not drawing, just threatening. A move meant to intimidate. But now every phone was filming, and one Mononi, very expensive-looking man was standing near the business lounge entrance, already dialing. We're going to have a legal situation here, he muttered into his phone. Now, because what happened next didn't just clear Babacar Diallo. It exposed something much deeper in the airport's system, and someone high up was about to get burned. A murmur rippled through the gate. Phones were up, recording from every angle now. Zora hadn't moved. The man from IRE stayed close by. Babacar Diallo stood calm in the center, his presence magnetic, composed, undeniable. But the agents? They were sweating. The younger one's hand twitched, uncertain what to do next. The older one spoke into his earpiece again, whispering fast, urgent. Then, from somewhere behind the glass wall of the executive corridor, a new figure emerged. Not in uniform, not in TSA blue or private security gray. A man in a navy pinstripe suit, gold cufflinks, and eyes that never blinked. Airport Operations Director. His badge said McCollin. He walked like someone used to controlling boardrooms, not terminals. McCollin approached without making eye contact. Mr. Diallo, he began, tone perfectly measured. Let's move this conversation to a more private area. It sounded polite, but it wasn't a request. Babacar didn't blink. This is a private matter, he replied, until your staff made it public. McCollum lowered his voice, but the cameras were still rolling. There are security conference signals, anonymous tips. We just want to ensure. Diallo raised one hand. Let me guess. He interrupted. The anonymous tip was vague but credible. The signal was detected but not confirmed. The agent followed protocol, and no one here is technically responsible. McCollum's jaw tensed. Sir, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Diallo stepped closer, but his voice dropped at barely above a whisper. So is it you? McCollum blinked. Excuse me. The one who sent the flag. The one who realized I was flying to Dakar with documents that could expose your investors. You could hear the tension break in a few bystanders' throats. McCollum tried to laugh. I don't know what you're implying. But Babacar leaned in, eyes unblinking. I think you do. That was the moment. The man in the gold cufflinks didn't smile, didn't shout, just stared at a black CEO who knew more than he was supposed to and refused to bow. Have you ever seen someone with power finally realize they can't control the room anymore? That flicker of panic in their eyes? McCollum stepped back. I'll speak to legal, and vanished into the corridor. But it wasn't over. Diallo turned to the agents. You still want to take me into a private room? He asked, eyes gleaming now. They said nothing. He turned to Zora, then the IRE rep, then to the phones. And then he raised the case. This, he said, was never just about what's in the bag. He clicked it open again. This time, he pulled out a file. Slim, black, with one silver emblem on the cover. OECD Confidential. Zora leaned in. Is that? Babacar nodded. Proof of diverted infrastructure funds. From investors linked to 3 government contracts, including this airport. Gasps. Whispers again. The agents froze. Because if the document was real, this wasn't about race anymore. It was about exposure, reputation, criminal liability. And now, the one man they tried to push out was holding the detonator. But what he did next took everyone by surprise. Even Zora. Babacar didn't raise his voice. He didn't call for security. He simply turned toward the nearest camera, his own phone still living, and said, I'd like to formally request a meeting with the oversight board of this airport, and I'd like it recorded. A hush dropped like velvet across the terminal. It wasn't drama. It was domination. Soft, intentional, unmistakable. McCollum had disappeared. The agent stood paralyzed. Even the woman at the check-in counter stopped typing mid-keystroke. But Diallo kept going. I believe public infrastructure deserves public truth, and I'm willing to let this document be reviewed by your legal department on one condition. He paused. No one breathed. That the next time a man who looks like me gets stopped, your staff will remember what happened here and think twice. Have you ever seen someone offer mercy with more force than revenge? That moment hit harder than if he'd shouted. Zora looked up at him, wide-eyed. The IRE representative you hadn't even blinked since the folder open stepped forward. I'll join that meeting, he said. And then a woman in a navy blazer Simeon no one had noticed until no spoke. From behind the velvet lounge ropes. Sir, I'm with the African Investment Transparency Forum, she said softly. We'd like a copy of your findings. Babacar nodded once. This copy stays with me, he said. But I'll present it live, to the right audience. And then, in front of everyone, he did something no one expected. He closed the case, locked it, and sat down, right there, in the middle of gate D13. He wasn't leaving. He wasn't hiding. He was waiting for them to come to him. That was the quietest power move in the entire airport's history. And people knew it. Phones kept rolling. Hashtags began trending. Gated 1-3. Diallo did not flink. A college student nearby whispered to her friend, this feels bigger than news. It feels historic. And just when the agents thought they could slip away unnoticed, Babacar looked at them again. You're welcome to sit, he offered, gesturing to the row of empty chairs beside him. It wasn't sarcasm. It was an invitation to accountability, to witness, and the older one sat, stiffly. But he sat, because the script had flipped, and everyone knew it. Let me ask you something. If you were in that room, right then, would you sit down with him, or walk away and pretend you saw nothing? Comment below, sit or leave. Because what happened next didn't just involve a meeting. It exposed a name no one expected to hear. A name tied to the highest level of this airport's funding. And that name was printed inside Babacar Diallo's black folder. It began with a name, not shouted, not announced, just spoken. Quietly, precisely. Everett Langston. Babacar said it like a diagnosis. Like a surgeon pointing to the tumor no one wanted to name. Zora blinked. The IR rep stiffened. The woman from the African Investment Forum whispered, "Wait, that Everett Langston." Babacar nodded once. CEO of Stratos Development, primary donor to 3 of the last 5 airport expansions. Also, godfather to director McCollin's son. Now the silence wasn't awkward. It was radioactive. Because when power has a face and a last name, suddenly everything feels more fragile. Babacar reached into the folder again, pulled out one more page. This one was stamped with a red digital watermark, internal audit restricted circulation. It was a wire transfer summary. 3 separate payments, all routed through consulting subsidiaries based in the Cayman Islands. All linked indirectly, but unmistakably to Langston's firm. And all paid out exactly 1 week before security upgrades were approved upgrades. That included the racial profiling risk metric used in the terminal's AI. Yes, that's right. They programmed bias into software, and then covered it with tech speak. Zora leaned over. They coded discrimination into the scanners. Babacar nodded again. They called it predictive risk sensitivity. Have you ever had a hunch that the system was rigged and then saw the blueprint with your own eyes? Because that's what this was. A blueprint for control, for silence, for erasure. And now, it was being read aloud. Live. The view count had hit 89,000. A breaking news alert flashed across someone's phone. LIVE, Black CEO accuses airport of algorithmic discrimination. That was when the suits returned. But this time not agents, lawyers, 3 of them, briefcases in hand, expressions tight. McCollin came behind them, sweat beading at his hairline. He spoke first. "Mr. Diallo, I've been informed this is becoming a media issue. Perhaps we can de-escalate." Babacar stood. "No," he said. "We're not de-escalating. We're documenting." He turned toward the cameras. "I am requesting a formal hearing, with press present, to review every security contract issued in the past 5 years. I will be presenting this evidence to federal oversight." The lawyers didn't argue. They knew better. And then the final twist of the hour. One of the lawyers, a woman in her 40s, adjusted her glasses and said, "Mr. Diallo, I just need to inform you that Mr. Langston is en route." Zora whispered, "He's coming here." The lawyer nodded, "To meet privately." But Babacar, he just smiled. "I don't do private anymore. Let me ask you something. If you held truth in your hands but the system begged you to hand it over quietly, would you? Or would you let the world see it burn? Tell me below, quiet or public. Because when Everett Langston walked into gate D13, no one could have guessed what he would say or who he'd blame. He didn't come with security. He didn't need to. Everett Langston entered gate D13 like he owned it. Because, in a way, he did. Tailored navy suit, loafers that didn't make a sound, watch that glinted even under the dull terminal lights. He didn't look at the cameras, didn't glance at the crowd. He walked straight to Babacar. "Mr. Diallo," he said, extending a hand like this was a business brunch. Babacar didn't move. "Langston," he replied, tone flat. Langston's eyes flicked to the lock case beside Babacar. "Quite a show you've put on, and you've built quite the stage for it," Babacar returned. Langston smirked, but only for a moment. "May we speak away from all this noise?" "No," Babacar said, calmly. "We speak here." Langston's jaw flexed, just slightly. That micro-expression people miss unless they've seen real power flinch. He adjusted his cuff. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Langston began, voice smooth. I had no knowledge of any predictive metrics being racially coded. That was a subcontractor decision, buried in the tech stack. Babacar raised an eyebrow. 3 separate payments, routed through shell companies you approved. Langston didn't blink. Delegated authority. Every executive handles hundreds of transfers per quarter. You signed the final audit. Langston's silence was his answer. That's when the woman lawyer stepped in. Mr. Langston, given the live stream and ongoing public exposure, let them stream. Langston snapped quietly. This will pass. But then Babacar did something he hadn't done all day. He opened the case again. Not to the crowd. Not to Langston. To Zora. He pulled out a single sheet and handed it to her. Read it, he said. Her eyes scanned the page, then widened. It's an internal memo, she whispered. From Stratos. Dated 6 months ago. And it names you. Langston didn't move. Zora kept reading, voice shaking now. You wrote, we need to minimize visibility on flag demographics until after funding rounds are secured. Dead silence. Langston's voice was ice. That document was stolen. Babacar didn't smile. Correction. It was emailed to me by someone inside your company. Someone who didn't want to be complicit anymore. Langston's lips curled. Then I suggest you release their name right now. But Babacar leaned forward. You want me to betray a whistleblower publicly? Langston hesitated because they knew would be his final mistake. The viewership crossed 143,000. A national news outlet started rebroadcasting the feed live. And now Langston's empire was the one on trial. Let me ask you this. If someone like Langston looked you in the eye and demanded silence, would you give it? Or would you let the weight of truth do what gravity always does? Tell me in one word, bend or break. Because what Langston said next revealed the name of the real traitor in the room. Langston didn't blink, didn't sweat, didn't deny. He simply tilted his head and said, then I suppose it's time we talk about McCollin. The name dropped like a stone in a still pond. Even the lawyers turned. Director McCollin, who had vanished moments ago, was now nowhere in sight. Langston went on. I is still locked on Babacar. He was the one who integrated the profiling module, pushed it through under pilot testing to avoid audit. He wanted results fast. Said it would make the terminal look proactive during donor inspections. Babacar narrowed his gaze. So you're throwing your own inside man under the bus? Langston exhaled sharp, theatrical. He overstepped. I gave him discretion, not permission. Zora stepped forward. But you funded it, the shell companies. The reports your signature is on the papers. Langston turned to her, like noticing her for the first time. And who are you? Exactly. I'm the reason people are still watching, she said, chin high. A few people behind her clapped. Soft, but sharp. Langston's smirk faltered. Babacar stepped between them. This isn't about hierarchy anymore, Everett. It's about exposure. Langston's tone chilled again. An exposure, my friend, is expensive. But Babacar didn't flinch. Then you'd better prepare your wallet. Suddenly, someone called out from the far corner. I just saw McCollin leave through staff access. Phones pivoted. People moved toward the glass wall where McCollin had once stood. Too late. He was gone. A TSA officer near the checkpoint swallowed hard. I think he flew private. There's a helipad on the roof. Langston didn't even look surprised. Of course he did. He always has an exit plan. Zora frowned. And what about the rest of us? Langston turned to her again. You all wanted a villain. I just gave you one. He thought that would win him the room, but instead it turned against him. Because no one wanted a convenient scapegoat. They wanted accountability. Real uncomfortable. Personal. Babacar held up the folder again. This isn't just about one man. It's about how the system protects itself. Quietly. Elegantly. Until someone refuses to stay quiet. Then, he turned to Langston once more. You built a machine. McCollin just ran it. Langston finally broke eye contact. Just for a second. And that was enough. Have you ever seen someone so powerful finally run out of room to hide? Because that pause of the breath wasn't fatigue. It was calculation. Langston wasn't finished. He was recalibrating. Let me ask you, when power can't crush the truth, what do you think it does next? Comment one word below. Strike or shift. Because what Langston said just 10 seconds later changed the entire strategy. He didn't fight Babacar. He offered him something. Langston stepped closer. Not threatening. Calculated. He lowered his voice, but not too much. Just enough to make the words sound like privilege. You're smart, Babacar. Too smart to think outrage builds systems. Babacar said nothing. Langston continued. You're right. I funded it. I own the contractors. And yes, the profiling module was real. A gasp swept through the crowd. Langston raised a hand. But I'll make you an offer. Right now. Every phone trembled. Every breath held. I'll sign over access, he said, to every audit, every file. You can restructure it all. You can lead the reform. Babacar blinked. And the catch? Langston smiled. You do it under my umbrella. You come into the fold, publicly, quietly. I name you Executive VP of Global Ethics at Stratos. Zora inhaled sharply. You're trying to buy him off. Langston didn't flinch. I'm trying to elevate him. The real battlefield isn't here, it's inside the contracts. The policy boards, the backrooms. That's where things change. He turned to Babacar again. Stay outside, and you'll always be an icon. Step inside and you'll have the pen. It was tempting. Tempting. Have you ever stood on the edge of a cliff? Not afraid of falling, but afraid of what you become if you didn't. That's what Babacar was facing now. The crowd was divided. Some nodded, take it. Others whispered he'll disappear inside their system. Babacar looked at Langston, then at Zora, then at the live stream, still climbing. 183,000 viewers now. He took a breath, then said, You think I want a pen? I've had one for years. Langston's smile cracked. Babacar continued, But if I sign under your umbrella, what happens to Zora? To whistleblowers? To the people who can't get in the room unless they burn the door down? Langston's jaw locked. You can't win both. I already did, Babacar said, the moment I didn't flinch. And then, he turned to the crowd. I reject the offer. A woman near the back gasped. Langston stepped back. You'll regret this. Babacar shook his head. No, you will. Because what he did next wasn't about revenge. It was about resetting the entire board. And you won't believe where he went first. He didn't storm out. He walked past the agents, past the lawyers, past Langston, whose offer still hung in the air like smog refusing to lift. Babacar Diallo didn't say another word to him, because power doesn't always end in confrontation. Sometimes, it ends in clarity. He stepped through the gate exit, cameras following, and what he found waiting on the other side. Reporters, activists, young interns from energy startups holding signs that said, Truth at Gate D13. And we believe Babacar. But that wasn't the moment that mattered most. It came 3 days later. At a small press conference in a grand stage, no velvet rope, just a microphone, a chair, and a single folder. That same black folder. He opened it, placed it on the table, and said, These documents are now public. A beat, every file, every contract, every transfer. They've been uploaded to a transparency ledger backed by multiple watchdog coalitions. He leaned forward. This isn't about punishing a man. It's about dismantling a habit. That line, it traveled. By the end of the week, for regional airports had suspended contracts with Stratos. By the end of the month, McCullen's name disappeared from the airport's leadership page. And by the end of the year, Babacar Diallo launched something no one expected. The Gate D13 Initiative, an independent task force funded anonymously at first designed to audit digital profiling systems and global transit hubs. Guess who sat on the youth advisory board? Zora Kendrick, 17 years old, full scholarship to any university she chose. When asked how it all began, she simply said, I raised my voice, and Mr. Diallo didn't flinch. Have you ever wondered how change really starts? It's not with a vote, not even with a law. It's with a moment when someone says no and means it. This isn't a story about an airport. It's not even about corruption. It's about what happens when you open a case and inside it isn't money or contraband but truth. Heavy, inconvenient, uncomfortable, but true. So let me leave you with this. If you were standing at that gate, bag in hand, world watching, and everything you'd worked for could vanish if you told the truth, would you still unzip it? Tell me in one word, open or hide. Because somewhere out there, another case is being flagged, another person is being profiled, and another decision is being made. The kind that changes everything.